Hello, this is Leroy Meadows and welcome to this session. And today we're going to work exercise 6-27 out of the back of your book. So 6-27, we're going to deal with budgeting for direct material usage, manufacturing costs, and then gross margin. So let's go ahead and take a look at the problem here. Zander Manufacturing Company manufactured blue rugs using wool and dye as direct materials. One rug is budgeted to use 36 skeins of wool at a cost of $2 per skein and 8/10 of a gallon of dye at a cost of $6 per gallon. All other materials are indirect. At the beginning of the year, Zander had an inventory of 458,000 skeins of wool at a cost of $961,800 and 4,000 gallons of dye at a cost of $23,680. Target ending inventory of wool and dye is 0, so we don't want to have anything left. Zander uses the first in, first out inventory cost flow method. Zander blue rugs are very popular and demand is high, but because of capacity constraints, the firm will only produce 200,000 blue rugs this year. The budgeted selling price is $2,000 each. There are no rugs in beginning inventory. Target ending inventory of rugs is also 0. Zander makes rugs by hand, but uses a machine to dye the wool. Thus, overhead costs are accumulated into two cost pools, one for weaving and the other for dyeing. Weaving overhead is allocated to products based on direct manufacturing labor hours. Dyeing overhead is allocated to products based on machine hours. There is no direct manufacturing labor cost for dyeing. Zander budgets 62 direct manufacturing labor hours to weave a rug at a budgeted rate of $13 per hour. It budgets 2/10 of a machine hour to dye each skein in the dyeing process. The following table presents budgeted overhead cost information for dyeing and weaving cost pools. And we're given total budgeted costs separated by variable and fixed. And total budgeted costs are $17,280,000 for dyeing, and overhead is budgeted in the weaving department for $31,620,000. Now, the first thing we're asked to do, and we've got 8 different things here we're asked to do. The first thing we're asked to do is prepare a direct materials usage budget in both units and dollars. So we not only have to count for the materials in the units, but also for the cost of those units as well. So let's go ahead here and let's take a look at the direct materials for wool and dye. So for wool, how many skeins do I need to make for that 200,000 blue rugs? Well, I'm going to look at my problem here, and it says that one rug is budgeted to use 36 skeins of wool. So if I'm going to have 200,000 rugs made, and it takes 36 skeins of wool, I'm going to need 7,200,000 skeins total. So 7,200,000 skeins. And then how much dye am I going to need? Well, I'm going to need 200,000 rugs, and each rug takes 8/10 of a gallon. So 200,000 rugs times 0.8 gallons. I'm going to need 160,000 gallons of wool here, or dye here. So let's go ahead and format that a little bit better. There we go. So we're going to look at my cost budget here. So how much do I have available from beginning inventory? Now we already remember that we don't want any ending inventory. So I only have to come up with the amount to purchase this year. If this is the case, then let's go ahead and do our cost budget here. How much of beginning inventory do we have for wool? Well, we have total skeins. Let's see here. It tells us that, let's see, at the beginning of the year, Zander has 458,000 skeins of wool at a cost of $961,800. So that's how much I got here, $961,800. Okay, and now I need to know, how many do I have to purchase? Well, if I know that each skein takes 7 million, or if I need total skeins of 7,200,000, And let's see, how many do I have on hand? 7,200,000. And I'm going to subtract from that the 458,000 that I already have in skeins. That means I need to buy 6,742,000 skeins at a cost of $2 each. That means I need to purchase, dollar-wise, $13,484,000. So let me $13,484,000. So my total direct materials to be used this period are going to be what? They're going to be, let me see, let me format that. $14,445,800. Again, $961,800 came from beginning inventory, so the remainder I have to purchase this year. And now let's take a look at dyeing. How much in beginning inventory do I have from dyeing? I have what? 23,680. So I'll take my 23,680, and let me go ahead and format these now. And how much do I need to purchase? Well, I need to figure out how many gallons I need to purchase first, and then multiply that by the cost per gallon in order to get the total cost of purchases to be made this year. So let's see, I have an ending inventory and 4,000 gallons of dye at a cost of 23,680. So if I need 160,000 and I already have 4,000 gallons on hand, I need to purchase what? 156,000 gallons. So 156,000 gallons of dye at a cost of, let's see, how much does it cost? $6 per gallon. It tells me right over here. So the total cost of purchasing gallons this year of dye is going to be $936,000. So how much in total direct materials am I going to use this year for dye? Well, I'm going to simply add up how the cost of my beginning inventory plus the cost of my purchases I need to make this year. And then my direct materials we use this year for dye is $959,680. So between the two materials, how much am I going to spend total for the rugs? Well, I'm going to have $14,445,800 worth of wool, plus $959,680 for the dye, and that will give me $15,405,480 total cost of direct materials for the 200,000 rugs. So now let's figure out our budgeted overhead rates. Remember, we were told earlier that dyeing is based on what? Direct manufacturing labor hours, and weaving was based on direct manufacturing labor hours, and dyeing was based on machine hours. So let's take a look here, and what is my overhead cost rate? Let's see here. Let me get out my calculator here. And let's take a look at weaving first. 31,620,000, and that is allocated by the number of direct manufacturing labor hours, which is 12,400,000. So if I take my overhead of 31,620,000 and divide that by 12,400,000 labor hours, I get an overhead cost rate in the weaving department for $2.55 per direct manufacturing labor hour. So let's see, weaving 2.55, and we'll put here per direct manufacturing labor hour. Now, what about my dyeing overhead? Well, my dyeing overhead is $17,280,000. $17,280,000. And we're going to divide that by 1,440,000 machine hours. That's what we're told is our allocation base. And we're told here in the table right here how many machine hours we're going to need. So divide that 1,440,000. And I'm going to get an overhead cost rate of $12 per machine hour. So now we can calculate the budgeted unit cost of blue rugs by taking in the wool, the dye, direct manufacturing labor, dyeing overhead, weaving overhead to get a total cost per unit, and then get a total cost here of our making the rugs. So let's look. Okay, so let's take a look. What is the cost per unit for wool? That is what? $2. What is the dye cost per unit per gallon? $6. And how much is direct manufacturing labor? We're told that the budgeted rate is $13. And how much is our dyeing overhead allocation? Our overhead allocation is $12 per machine hour. And then our weaving overhead is $2.55 per direct manufacturing labor hour. So how many units does it take per unit of output? So let's take a look here. And wool, how many skeins of wool do I need per unit? And we're told here in the problem that one rug is budgeted to use 36 skeins of wool. So if I have $2 per skein and I need 36 skeins per rug, what is the per unit cost of wool? Well, the per unit cost of wool is going to be $2 times 36, and that's going to be $72. Let's take a look at dyeing. It takes $6 per gallon. And how many gallons do I need per rug? Well, 0.8. So if I take that as 6 times 0.8, that should give me $4.80 per rug. And let me go ahead here and just format this a little bit better. There you go. Now, what about direct manufacturing labor? We know the cost is $13 per rug per hour. And how many hours do we need to produce each rug? And let's see, we make hand 62 direct manufacturing labor hours to weave each rug. So $13 per hour times 62 hours to make each rug. And I'm going to have a cost of direct labor for each rug of $806,000, or $806 rather. Now, what about my dyeing overhead? Well, I know my cost per unit, my allocation per unit is going to be $12 per machine hour. And how many machine hours does it take to make each rug? We are told here that it takes 0.2 machine hours to dye each skin. So how do we get that? And to dye each skein. So we gotta watch here, because it takes not 0.2 machine hours to dye each rug, but 0.2 machine hours to dye each skein. And I need 36 skeins. So I'm going to take my 36 times 0.2, and that should give me 7.2 machine hours to dye each rug. So 7.2, oops, 7.2, and that gives me a total cost of dyeing overhead to be $86.40. Now, let's take a look at our weaving. Well, we have a cost of $2.55 of allocated overhead per direct per direct manufacturing labor hour. How many direct manufacturing labor hours does it take to weave a rug? Well, we just computed it up here, 62. So 62 hours to weave each rug. So when I take 62 hours of direct manufacturing labor hours, multiply that by $2.55 of overhead from the weaving department, and I'm going to get overhead of $158.10. So now I've computed all the factors to go into the budgeted unit cost of making a rug. So now I just add those together, and my cost for making each rug is going to be $1,127.30. Now let's take a look at step 4, Prepare a revenues budget for blue rugs for the year, assuming Xander sells 200,000 or B, 185,000 rugs. So we have to compute the revenues budget at two different sales levels. So let's see, at 200,000 sales units, we're going to sell 200,000. And then the price for each rug that we're selling is how much? It tells us where? 2,000. So 200,000 units at 2,000 a piece. Gives me a total revenue of 40 million. I'm sorry, 400 million. But what if I only sell, like the problem says, what if I only sell 185,000 of those? Well, if I only sell 185,000 at a cost of $2,000 each, then what are going to be my total revenues? Well, my total revenues in that case will be 370 million. So in other words, the problem is asking me, what are my revenues at two different sales level? Why do we need to know that? Well, probably the management wants to know what happens if we sell all of our rugs, but what happens if we don't? So now we have the budget revenues at two different levels here. Okay, so let's take a look at the next part of the problem. It says calculate the budgeted cost of goods sold for blue rugs under each sales assumption. So we're going to assume that when we sell 200,000 units, we produce 200,000 units. So when we produce 200,000 units, we're going to sell them all. And then under the second assumption, we're going to produce 200,000 units, but only sell 185,000 of those units. So let's take a look at the first one here. Direct materials. Let's see. We have no beginning inventory here. So we have a $0 amount for beginning inventory, because remember the problem said up there there's no beginning inventory. Now, how much direct material are we using? Well, we solve for that up here cost-wise at $15,405,480, and we figured that out in our direct materials cost budget. So $15,405,480, and let me go ahead and format these. And how much direct manufacturing labor do we have? Well, it's costing me what? We calculated up here direct manufacturing labor of $806 per rug times 200,000 rugs. So it equals $806 per rug times 200,000 rugs, or 200, yeah. And we get total direct labor costs of $161,200,000. Now, what about dyeing? Well, we've got dyeing overhead. Remember, we had dyeing overhead. It cost $86.40 per unit. So I'm going to take my $86.40 per unit and multiply that by the number of rugs I plan on selling. And I should have dyeing overhead incorporated into my cost of goods sold of $17,280,000. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my weaving overhead. I'll take my cost of overhead from the weaving department of $158.10 per unit times the number of units I'm going to produce, which is 200,000. And I should get overhead from the weaving department of $31,620,000. So how much total is my cost of goods available for sale? Well, I'm going to take a look. I'm going to just equal the sum of, well, let me see here, equal the sum of this and my cost of goods available for sale is $225,505,000. And again, if we're selling 200,000 units and we produce 200,000 units, do we have any finished goods inventory? No, we do not. So I just simply have here my cost of goods sold of $225,505,480. And this is assuming the number of units produced is the number of units sold. Now, let's take a look at the next scenario. What happens if we produce 200,000 units but only sell 185,000 units? Well, I'm going to have my cost of goods available for sale. The same as it's going to be the same. My only difference in this situation is allocating between what is an ending finished goods inventory versus what is sold. So I've already got this here. And let me just, copy and paste wasn't working. And let's see, 280,000 and 31,620. So my cost of goods available for sale is going to be the same. However, now I need to figure out how much money do I have in finished goods inventory. What am I going to do? Well, I can take my cost per unit, which is what we determined up here, $1,127.30, and multiply that by how many units am I going to have in finished goods inventory if I produce 200,000 units and I only sell 185,000 rugs. I'm going to have 15,000. So I'm going to take my cost per unit of, what do we say up here? $1,127.30 times 15,000. And that will get me $16,909,500 in ending inventory. So out of all the cost of goods for available for sale we had $16,909,500 ending inventory. So the difference here is going to have to be the amount of our cost of goods sold. And this is giving me a problem here of 208,595,980, and that's assuming that we produced 200,000 rugs and only sold 185,000 rugs. Now let's take a look at gross margin. And gross margin is simply a revenue minus cost of goods sold. And remember, the gross margin is the amount of money left over after product costs are taken into account of the revenue. Gross margin is simply the amount of money left over after product costs in order to cover the remainder of the operating expenses. So let's take a look at our revenues. Now, if I'm under this assumption that 200,000 rugs were sold and 200,000 rugs were made, how much is going to be my revenue? Well, if I'm going to sell 200,000, and what is my cost? What is the sales price of that rug? And we are told that the sales price is, let's see here, $2,000 each. So $2,000. And so my total sales, if I sell and if I sell 200,000 rugs and make 200,000 rugs, 400 million. Actually, I could just have gone to up here. So minus my cost of goods sold, and I could figure out my cost of goods sold under the assumption of 200,000 units made, 200,000 units sold, 225,505,480. And so my gross margin is simply going to be my revenues minus expenses. And from there, my gross margin, if I make 200,000 rugs and sell 200,000 rugs, my gross margin is going to be 174,494,520. Now let's do the same thing to calculate gross margin whenever we make 200,000 units but only sell 185,000 units. So if I only sell 185,000 units, what is my revenue? Well, we calculated it up here at 370 million. So let's go ahead here. 370 million. And what was my cost of goods sold that we determined up here if we only sell 185,000 rugs out of the 200? Well, we determined up here the cost of goods sold is 208,595,980. So then my cost of goods sold is simply my revenues minus expenses. And that would get me my cost of goods sold of 209 million, or let's see, $161,404,020. And that's my cost of goods, and that's my gross margin if I make 200,000 rugs and only sell 185,000 of them. So, number 7, what actions might you take as a manager to improve profitability if sales drop to 185,000 blue rugs? Well, there's a couple things I can do. I can look to reduce fixed costs because I'm going to have the fixed costs here. Is there a way that I can reduce some of those fixed costs, maybe by limiting capacity, further restricting capacity? Are there anything else that I can get rid of there? And then also, we could also produce less. Instead of continuing to produce the 200,000 rugs, if we're only going to sell 185,000 once we've adjusted our projections, and the desire is not to have any ending inventory, well, why don't I adjust my production down to 185,000 units? So that way, I've adjusted for reduction of variable costs associated with manufacturing those 15,000 extra rugs. Now, how might top management and Xander use the budgeted development and requirements 1 through 6 to better manage a company? Well, we can always look for ways to increase sales, improve quality, efficiency, and input prices to reduce costs. Especially when we're talking about direct materials, direct labor, overhead costs. We can also use the budget to communicate our expectations across the different parts of the organization, different parts of the value chain. And then we can use this framework for judging performance, facilitating learning. So we're going back to the planning and control and learning. So we want to have stretch targets available, and that's made use of, as we talked about in the chapter, where the budget is challenging. We want to stretch them without making it too difficult, but we want to really make something happen here as far as either increasing our revenue, increasing the sales of those units, or decreasing either our variable or fixed costs, or some combination of the two. So, this is Leroy Meadows. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.